Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to talk about the Hoosiers. Welcome to the Inside Indiana podcast. This is Editor-in-Chief Ken Bikoff, along with publisher Ed Magoni and Inside Indiana writer Zach Osterman. And folks, we're just days away from the start of the Hoosier football training camp. Big Ten Media Day, or maybe you should say days, is later this week, and it ain't going to be long before the season's cranking up. But we'll have wall-to-wall coverage of the camp when it opens. But for now, we're going to spend a little time talking about some news off the recruiting trail that came down just a few days ago. The Hoosiers picked up linebacker Darrius Stroud, a 6'3", 225-pounder out of Hutchinson Community College in Kansas. He's the 13th commit to the class of 2012 for head coach Kevin Wilson. Now, he's a kid that got offers from Oklahoma State, Texas Tech, Kansas State, Minnesota. A number of other people were involved with it. Zach, I'm going to start with you. Just, does it tell you anything about Kevin Wilson's strategy that he's looking the JUCO route for a defensive player this early on?
Yeah, he's made no stranger to the fact, really since he got the job, that, I don't. Maybe I shouldn't say that he's not pleased with where the program is now, but I mean that he's interested in finding guys who can make an immediate impact, and he doesn't have a problem playing freshmen if he thinks that they're going to make an immediate impact. And I think that this signals that he doesn't have a problem bringing in. Generally when you bring in a JUCO guy, you expect him to be competing for a starting spot immediately because he's not a freshman, because he's more physically developed, he's more used to college, at least, to a certain level, to a certain extent. And I think this is the signal that, maybe he doesn't see enough depth in the linebacker core. Maybe he just thinks that the defense needs more impact players, but I think he's looking for people that are going to make an impact right away. I mean, you also look at Stephen Houston, that going through what they did to sign him up to get him into the fold this year. I don't think they would have gone through all that trouble if they didn't see him. This is the running back, for those who don't know, running back who committed and signed and will actually be in camp in the fall out of Junior College, Independence Junior College in Kansas. Why go through all that trouble if you don't think he's gonna make an impact in some way? So I think it's a signal that they're looking for a quicker impact from some new faces.
Zach, of course, is reaching us. He's over at the Indy Pro-Am covering that right now as well. He's over on the phone, but Ed Magoni is with us as well. And Ed, this is the 6th defensive player out of the 13 commits that Wilson has brought on. It's nice balance, certainly, but just the focus that does seem to be going towards defense does seem to be going for guys that are a little bit faster, guys who are people that could be impact players right away. Your thoughts on the addition of Stroud?
Oh, I think it's a very good sign for IU to be, besting these other BCS schools on the recruiting trail. And a guy like Stroud, who is a junior college kid, but they're taking him on as a commitment this early. That shows it's not necessarily a choice based on. Obviously it's based on necessity, but it's not like a panic or a 11th hour selection where you're scrambling to get a guy who may be able to fill in for you coming up in the following, months as the season's approaching. Now that they grabbed him mid-process, I think that tells you what kind of quality of player he was, and that this is a little bit different JUCO route than we've seen IU take. Whereas usually if they're adding someone via the JUCO wire, they're usually picking up a guy in the summer right before the season starts to add to fall camp. Whereas Stroud is coming on in the summer before he's going to actually sign in February. So, it's a little bit of a different scenario there, and I think he's a little bit higher caliber player than IU's used to getting from the junior college route.
Yeah, it is a little bit different. And when you look at the linebackers, you have Leon Beckham and Jeff Thomas, two guys that have emerged as leaders for the defense, and they're kind of going to be guys that are going to be graduating after this year, and they've had success with junior college players in Jeff Thomas. And Zach, I wanted to ask you, do you think that this could be one of those situations where this is a guy that they feel might be able to kind of fill the gap there between some of those freshman guys that are going to be just starting out and, just from an experience standpoint, Jeff Thomas who's going to be moving on?
Yeah, I think they certainly hope so. As you talked about it, really if you look at the linebacker core, you see Beckham and you see Thomas, and there's not a heck of a lot of depth behind them. And, Indiana's defense, this is all relative considering the way that they've struggled over the last few years as a unit, but that linebacker core has been one that's actually at times been one of the deepest parts of the defensive, the entire sort of defensive unit. It's not going to be this year. I think that they are looking for, somebody who can step in and play right away. Again, that's kind of what you expect when you take a JUCO. It's sort of the same philosophy as the difference between the way a Major League Baseball team would view a kid taken out of high school versus a kid taken out of college. You're expecting the kid with more college experience, even at the junior college level, to be ready to contribute right away, whereas a lot of times you'd expect a freshman to need a few months, maybe a full season or two to really get acclimated. So I think that's certainly what they're hoping.
Yeah, and it's certainly not a knock on the incoming freshman linebackers that they have. Guys like Kyle Kennedy and Mike Replogle, Zach Shaw. These are guys that, especially Shaw, who's very highly regarded. But again, there is a difference in terms of a guy who's been in a college football program for a little while that might be able to step in and help a team immediately, right? Just the second that he steps in. Now, speaking of that, on the hardwood, a kid from LSU, Garrett Green, 6'11" center, is somebody who's come and visited. He's looking to move on from LSU. He's graduated, but he wants to go to a graduate school that isn't offered at LSU and into that kind of program. He could play for the Hoosiers this year. He has one more year of eligibility. And Ed, your thoughts on Indiana even flirting with the guy at this point in the equation?
Well, as Zach mentioned in his story on our website earlier this week, or yesterday actually, I think it's a great fit for IU. I mean, they need a one-year guy so they don't occupy a scholarship too long. They need help inside with Bobby Capobianco moving on and Guy-Marc Michel not working out as far as his eligibility issues went. And they need a big body, and he's got college experience, which is in a major conference like the SEC, which is always good. He had some back issues earlier in his career. Whether or not he's ever actually fully recovered from those is debatable. But I think he's a live body. I think he has the ability to score facing the basket. He can also rebound pretty well based on his numbers from last season. And I think it's a great fit for IU because he's only going to occupy a scholarship for 1 year before the class of 2012 gets here, with a little bit more inside help with Tanner Perea and Peter Jerkin joining Cody Zeller in the last two classes. So I think he's actually a very good scenario for IU if it works out for them. But the other thing is he also wants to move closer to home. Indiana isn't very much closer to home than LSU was, which is out in California. So we'll have to wait and see what happens. But certainly from the IU perspective, it's a good choice.
Zach, you did quite a piece on our website about the reasons you thought that he fit. What has really struck you the most about the importance? What would be the biggest upside and the biggest downside of bringing him on?
I think the biggest upside, for me anyway, is just sort of how neatly it all kind of fits together. I mean, Ed laid out the scenario there for the situation that Indiana has a scholarship open for this coming season, but it's only open through this coming season. Green only has 1 year of eligibility left. That's not a negotiable thing. He's used up his red shirt, so he's in the 5th year of his 5-year clock. Once the season's over, his career's done. So it makes sense from that perspective. And it also makes sense because, I know that Indiana explored the idea in the spring of adding, a big body to the recruiting class, went down a couple different paths, nothing really worked out. And again, as Ed kind of alluded to, that the concern there was just that, Cody Zeller is in the fold this year, Hunter Perea and Peter Jerkin are in the fold next year, Jeremy Hollowell is in the fold next year. Tom Crean likes to run a lot of 3-guard offenses. He did that a lot at Marquette. I mean, I think I mentioned this in the story. The last team that he sort of built at Marquette before he left was the team that was basically built around, Dominic James and Jarrell McNeil and Wesley Matthews. So, you can never have too many big men, but keep in mind that Indiana is not likely to go 6'10", 6'11" across its front line either that often. So, adding a guy who is going to need some time to develop in 2013 or 2011, he might have gotten kind of pushed back in in later classes by guys coming in. this makes a ton of sense to me because you only get that 1 year, because you don't really have to develop this guy much, and because, frankly, you don't have to expect much from him. He was, at this point, you're sort of playing with house money if you add Garrett Green to the roster because, if you didn't have him, it's just a 1 year thing, and you didn't expect to have him until, maybe a week ago or less. So I think that the negative is really mostly just if, and this isn't something that anyone's going to be able to determine until he gets to, campus. Let's say hypothetically he commits. It's not going to be something anybody can determine immediately. He is going to have to gel quickly with kids in this program. There's a lot of guys who are going to feel really invested in this program this coming year. You've got a lot of guys who've played big minutes as freshmen, as sophomores, and as juniors, and they're going to feel really invested in the idea of, in their last season, putting Indiana sort of back toward the top of the Big Ten, back toward an NCAA tournament, maybe not in the NCAA tournament, but, really kind of finally getting the program turned around, finishing with a winning record and things like that. He is going to have to sort of prove himself to those guys. He's going to have to gel with those guys. I have no reason to think he is or isn't going to have a problem with that. That's just going to be, that's the big thing for me. And like I said, that's something that you can't really know until he gets into the fold and spends time off the court with guys and in the locker room and stuff like that. So.
Of course, the clock's ticking on Garrett Green, but of course the clock's ticking too a little bit on the NFL. And I wanted to mention real quickly a couple of guys who have entered the undrafted free agency three-ring circus that is the NFL right now. You had Ben Chappell apparently signing with the Washington Redskins. I know Terrence Turner, I think, landed with the Eagles. There's a number of other IU players that are kind of exploring their options there with the NFL. And Ed, I wanted to ask you, is it just me, or does it seem to you that maybe Indiana has a few more guys that are still dancing around NFL camps than they have had in the past? And what does that say about the level of talent that maybe has changed at Indiana a little bit over the last couple of years?
Well, I certainly think, just based on the fact that Tracy Porter was such an essential part of the Super Bowl for the Saints, and Courtney Roby was on that team as well. Antoine Randall played in the Super Bowl last season with the Steelers. And now you've got Ben Chappell and Terrence Turner and Tannen Doss and James Brewer, all from the last class, joining the ranks of professional football players. I think it's a great sign for IU. It gets the name out there a little bit more. Tannen Doss is going to play a significant role with the Ravens for sure. James Brewer is probably going to, work into the two deep out there in New York. So, I don't see, I can only think it's a good thing for IU to have, more guys saying Indiana University on Monday Night Football when they do the intros, or, wherever the case may be, puts IU football on the map a little bit. And, it's certainly exciting for these kids who have been waiting so long, like Ben Chappell and Terrence Turner, who usually would have been picked up the day after the draft back in April. And now they're finally getting signed by someone and getting to a camp in July. It must have been a painstaking process for Terrence Turner and Ben Chappell waiting all that time. But, certainly it's nice to see them finally get signed on the dotted line and get into a camp and get a shot, because I think Ben Chappell is going to catch on with the Redskins, with Don McNabb exiting, and a couple of John Beck's still young there, and a veteran like Rex Grossman also there, but they do need a third quarterback, and Ben Chappell's the only one they have on the roster right now. So he's got a legitimate chance of catching on, and Terrence Turner with Deshaun Jackson maybe holding out in Philadelphia, he'll have a shot too. So I think it's great for both those guys, and certainly good for IU football to have more guys in the pros than they used to have.
Well, Ed, you mentioned James Brewer. Of course, there's also Roger Saffold, who's protecting Sam Bradford's blind side in St. Louis. So, yeah, I mean, you're talking about a couple of linemen there that are making that transition. I'm going to put you on the spot here, Zach. Do you see any of the linemen that Indiana has this year that might be able to draw a little bit of NFL attention as the season goes on?
Yeah, I think a name to throw out there just because he's been talked about so highly is Will Maddie. I think you're always looking for, reliability at center. It's a much harder position to play than I think a lot of people realize, just in terms of how much you have to sort of adapt between You're essentially sort of quarterbacking the offensive line. You have to make sure that snap is clean every single time. You've got to snap the ball and then come up to block. I think that's really, like I said, I think it's a heavily underrated skill to have, and I think Matty is comported himself well at that position throughout his career. Beyond that, there's other guys with good measurables that, you talk about a guy like Justin Pagan or Andrew McDonald. But I'm not sure, I think those are guys that are going to need to have, need to improve more in college before they can really start thinking about being, full-fledged professional prospects.
Yeah, and that's certainly something that Kevin Wilson, I know, is pushing both of those guys to step up their game. It'll be interesting to see how those guys kind of develop as the season goes on, but they're going to have the time to develop here in camp. But that's all the time that we have for now. I wanted to thank you for joining us. And don't forget to check back later this week for all the news from the Big Ten Media Days. For Ed Magoni and Zach Osterman, this is Ken Bikoff. Thanks for listening, and pace yourself.